Fourth Wing, I finally finished it, and now I can talk about it. Let's go. So it's taken a while to adjust since moving back up to uni, so I have been in a bit of a reading slump, which is why it took me the longest time to read this book. But that is no disrespect to this book. I actually have a lot of lovely things to say about it. But even so, there are also other things that I didn't care for. Let's get into it. Do I think this deserves to be the really the biggest book of 2023? Does it deserve its popularity? Yes. Yes, I do actually. There's a lot to love about it. It's not overly complicated. It's not gonna set the fantasy genre on fire, but I think that's what makes it so enjoyable. It's more palatable for people outside of fantasy. I feel like people who don't typically read fantasy books, they're quite intimidated by the genre because they tend to be bigger books with lots of crazy world building and terminology, and so it's easy to feel like a bit of an outsider with fantasy. And so I think if you're not familiar with the genre, this is a brilliant book to start with, and I think that's why it's taken off. So for the uninitiated, what is Fourth Wing? It's kind of like if you took How to Train Your Dragon, if you took those books, you sort of leached some of the charisma out of it because those books have a lot more personality, but you also put in some sort of YA charm to it. I think that's the best way of describing it. It really tickled me how predictable this book was at certain moments, and that's not a bad thing. I'm someone who's like a strong believer in reading for like the journey and not the destination. Like, I didn't care that I knew things were going to happen way before they ended up happening. That's just because I'm someone who's, read a lot of books like this and can see right through them. But I still think it's a great time. Like, you will enjoy yourself even if you saw the roadmap stretching ahead of you. I mean, even in the first few chapters, Violet, our main character, she meets two friends. She meets Rhiannon and she meets Dylan. And Dylan immediately is like, oh yeah, I'm so happy. When I graduate, I'm going to go home to my fiance and we're going to get engaged. Kiss of death. You never say that in a fantasy book. Oh, I can't wait to do this. Oh, that doesn't even mean you're going to die 300 pages into the book. That means that you're going to eat shit and be dead by the end of this chapter. And lo and behold, Parapet, oh no, dead. Dylan is dead. And there was a lot of that. I am hoping the next book will be a bit more subtle in how you play reveals, because especially, I mean, we'll get to it, but the big reveal at the end, I predicted it at chapter 6. The end of chapter 6, I said, oh, spoiler alert, Brennan is alive. If Brennan is a mender and a really good healer, you're telling me that he could have saved himself if he's a really good healer. Whatever injury he inflicted, oh, I'm alive. Like, so at the end when her brother just shows up and he turns out he hasn't been dead the whole time, it's like, yeah, I know. You weren't very subtle about it, Yarros. But as I said, predictability is not a bad thing for books like this. I think if you want to read Fourth Wing, it depends what you want from your fantasy. Are you someone who seeks out the alternative and enjoys books that go against the grain? This isn't for you, because this isn't what that does. This book makes no pretensions about subverting tropes. It's about embodying them. And I have a lot of respect for it for doing that, because I feel like a lot of writers these days try too hard to be the next new thing. They go so out of their way to be interesting. This book has a very clear mindset of what it wants to do successfully, and for the most part it does. Another thing that I'm hoping they'll address more in the sequel as well is Violet's medical condition. So if you didn't know, Rebecca Yarros, the writer, she has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is like a connective tissue disorder, and she wanted to represent that in Violet Sorrengail's character. But it's always the elephant in the room. There's never a sort of all-out conversation about it, and it just felt odd, because if you're going to the effort of including that, and I think you should, then why isn't it included more often? And I get it, like, sure, this is a quasi-medieval society where EDS wouldn't be an identifiable thing, obviously. And of course, her condition doesn't define her character, of course. But at the same time, don't include it if you're not going to have a conversation about it. Even if it's just Violet having an internal monologue about the everyday struggles of chronic illness, that at least would put some meat onto this thing, because there was nothing to hold on to. It was just this amorphous, half-baked idea. I was like, this is pointless. But as I said, much of this book is very much a to-do list. It's like we're box ticking every single trope that you would expect in a fantasy book. It's like, oh, Violet Sorrengail, she is a scrawny book nerd and she lives in the shadow of her family legacy. Is she going to rise up to the occasion and do right by them and by herself? Stay tuned. Like, literally, the moment in class they have a discussion about this black dragon, this huge mysterious dragon that has not come down to threshing for over 100 years. It might as well have been written in like neon lights in the sky. It's like, oh, that's the dragon Violet's gonna get, because Violet is Hiccup, and Ten, her dragon, her black dragon, is toothless. It's the Night Fury. It's like, oh, okay, this amazing dragon is going to see something in her that nobody else can, and will help her like achieve her true greatness. Sure, love it, but you know, we've seen it. That doesn't make it bad. I'm just acknowledging that this book is not different in any way. It's just good at what it does. I promise I'll stop comparing it to How to Train Your Dragon, but a part of me does wish that they had gotten more into the science of the dragons, because in How to Train Your Dragon, they really sort of unwind the taxonomy of the dragons. You learn about all of the different subgroups and how the dragons, based on their characteristics, belong to the different subgroups. I wish it had got into the biology of that, because yes, they're like an underdeveloped medieval like civilization, but they can still have a way of learning about the dragons. And that's something as well that I think the second book could learn from. The world building was a bit of a non-starter. You had like these quotations at the top of every chapter that told you snippets about the world, but I wanted to know, why does this kingdom exist? Why do they see the griffins as and the flyers as enemies? What's going on here? Tell me the extended history, even if it's just in like a classroom exposition scene. Fine, so long as I know it, because there was a lot of me wondering what the stakes were. And then that last fight that they have in the last 50 pages, it sort of just came out of nowhere. I was like, sure, you're going to fight these venin, these wyverns? Sure, go for it. But I don't really know why. Sometimes I get behind this camera and I sound a lot harsher than I mean to. I really did like a lot about this book. I mean, I'm quite a cynical person, so romance for me is something that I rarely enjoy. Xaden and Violet's relationship, I felt like a 12-year-old girl. I was giggling away, having the best time, rooting for them. When she climbs up the parapet again to meet him on the bridge and they declare an undying love for each other, oh my god, obsessed. Yes. So, don't mind my criticisms. I'm just saying that because I care. I think this is a really solid book. I'm excited for the sequel. I'm excited to see where this series goes. Pick it up.